Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We're joined today by Robert Toloy, head basketball coach, Santa Clara High School. Coach, thanks for showing up and being part of this.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Let's dive in. Why don't you take us through your background as a coach? How did you get into this wonderful endeavor, and how long you've been at it? What stops have you had along the way? Take us through the journey.
Wow. Are you sure you want me to do this?
Absolutely.
Okay. My first coaching opportunity started out in the Central Valley, Fresno area. My wife and I built a house out there. We relocated from the Bay Area. We're originally Bay Area folks. And, I used to play a lot. I was a kind of a selfish basketball player. I liked to play so much. And I was so used to that here in the Bay Area. When I relocated out to the Central Valley, I couldn't find any hot spots. There's a lot of hot spots. I just couldn't find them. So I reached out to a buddy of mine here back in the Bay Area. I said, hey, man, who do you know out in Central Valley that can help me find a place to go play? So he referred me to a mutual friend of ours. His name was, and you might know him, his name was Tony Amundson. And Tony and his brothers, Tim and Ty, the Amundson brothers, I first met them when in Hoop-It-Ups.
Clovis legends.
Yes, very big time legends. I was on my way out and they were on their way in, right? And so that's how I first met them, playing against them. But anyways, so I reached out to Tony, and it just turns out that Tony, the year before, had relocated from the Bay Area out there to go coach at a local high school. He was going to be an assistant coach. Now, I didn't know who that coach was going to be, he was coaching with. But it turns out it was Vance Walberg at Clovis West, right? Well, he says, come on out to Clovis West. We've got a bunch of coaches from all over the Fresno area. We even got Fresno State coaches out here and ex-collegiate players. So the runs were just absolutely incredible. Better than the runs I've had in the Bay Area. Because you got a bunch of high IQ, knowledgeable players out there. And so that's how I was introduced to the Vance Walberg camp. Okay. So at that first time that I went to play, he introduced me to Tim. This was my first time meeting Tim aside from against him on the court. And you know how the Amundson brothers are, they're really cool. And they love to hang out with ball players. And so we're chatting, and Tony just mentions, here's where it starts. Tony just mentions, hey, Tim, you're looking for an assistant. Rob be a good assistant for you. And at that time, Tim had just went over to Hoover High School in Fresno the year before. He didn't have any assistants. That's how I started my basketball coaching in Fresno, was with Tim at Hoover. And so he did a good job. His first year, he was runner-up in the Valley Championships in D1 against Vance Walberg. But it just so happens that for some reason or another, I don't want to get into it, but they were stripped of that title. And so Tim actually had a Valley Championship his first year, right? So anyways, I joined, and then for 2 years, we coached at Hoover. And it was a great experience. Incredible athletes, wow. But then we took the job at Clovis East. And when we took that job, they were the newest high school in Clovis Unified. And it was there that I was an assistant with Tim for about, I'd say 10 years, 10 years. At that time, I was playing still. So me and a really good coach named Mike Gregory, he and I would be on the second team. And we would be in the midst of all of the Vance Walberg drills, all the 2-on-1 Cardinals, Scramble, the Blood Series, the Texas Series. It was fun. I loved it so much that, because I'm still playing, I loved it so much that if I didn't play well that day, I was really upset with myself. I couldn't wait till the next day of practice, right? That engagement with Coach Gregory and I with the second group helped our first group, the entire program, adapt to the new system, right? And within 3 years, we were in a Valley Championship game against, I think it was Clovis West. We won 3
It was probably against Clovis West. They seem to be there all the time.
Oh, yeah. Clovis West was the marker. They were the baseline. So if you could get to compete against Clovis West, you're a pretty good program. And I remember those first 3 years that we were at Clovis East, they had never won a league game. And I think in the second year, we finally won a league game. And in the third year, we were more competitive. And I remember we were playing in this postseason playoffs against Clovis West. And we're running the same thing they're running. And we were down by, I think, 40 at halftime. And I remember the coaches, we were all getting together. We're like, what should we do? Should we keep the press on? Should we keep doing what we're doing? And we literally, that was the situation. Mike Gregory's son was on that team. He was a senior. He was a prolific three-point shooter, really good. But we all voted, let's just stay with what we got, because what kind of a message would we be sending to our younger kids? Because the gyms, all of our kids that played it, not only on our lower level, but also in our AAU, they're all out there watching us getting blasted by 40. So we didn't want to send the wrong message that we don't believe in what we're doing. We're just not good enough yet. So we finally got there, and we won 3 Valley championships in a 4-year run. And then my sons, my 2 older sons went through it. So I played in it, I coached it. My sons went through it, and I saw how they developed. And so when I came to the Bay Area in 2012, I got the job at Wilcox, and I wanted to bring the same system to Wilcox. The difference is in the Central Valley, club and AAU basketball is elementary schools that feed into the one junior high that feeds into that high school. So you got 6 to 8 elementary schools, and we have 2 to 3 teams per level. And we're teaching them the same things, running them through the same drills that we did at Clovis East with our high school kids. So that by the time they got to 9th grade, we're reloading. We're just reloading, right? But here in the Bay Area, when I was at Wilcox, that's where I got my first head coaching job in 2015. I was fighting, man. I was fighting club and AAU. My kids were all spread out all over the place. I inherited a really talented senior group, but were just underperforming the previous years. And I introduced them to all of the drills, all the breakdown drills that Vance Walberg had created for the system. And that year we went to the CCS semifinals that first year. And they were seniors. They only had about a month and a half to learn it. And they embraced it and they loved it. And so it's like Coach Vance Walberg says, he loves coaching kids that want to get better. And he's right, I get that. But I think what he's saying is they want to get better in his system. Right? I just saw Vance. I went over and watched Fresno State practice last Friday. Oh my goodness, they look really good. It's gonna be fun. But that's how I started my basketball coaching career. After 7 years at Wilcox, by the way, we were able to get to the CCS finals for the first time in Wilcox history, running this system. And that was a group where they were freshmen when I was in 2015. By the time that was my first group that I had 4 years, and we were able to get there. But after in 2020, I think it was, my last year, I stepped out of Wilcox because I had a grandson. My wife and I had our first grandson, and with the intent to return. But my good friend, who was my assistant at the time I was coaching, he's doing such a phenomenal job. He loved the system too, and so I couldn't go back. So the opportunity at Santa Clara was an opportunity I didn't want to pass up, even though it's going to be rebuilding. I just can't wait to see what kind of an impact it's going to make on those kids, the system that I'm bringing over there.
So what year did you get to Santa Clara?
This May. I just got there this May.
This is year 1. All right, perfect.
Yeah, this is year 1.
All right, great. So let's go back to something that you said for the listeners who aren't aware. Clovis is basically Texas in California.
Amen.
It's the only non-union school district in the state. When you are the head coach at one of the Clovis schools, you are the director of basketball.
Yes.
And it actually is a pyramid of going down to the lower levels to where everything is a feeder. It's this little bastion of being in a different place. So people that aren't in that area may not understand. So there's a little bit of background for you.
Yeah, the thing about when we went from Hoover to Clovis East, it was actually a national search for a coach at Clovis East at that time. It was I was like, a national search? Are you kidding me? Because I've never been around that kind of an environment, right? But the Clovis Unified School District, they take those things very seriously. They look for coaches that are able to year-round build and develop these kids, and that's just the way it is. So by the time it was like, I'd say 4 or 5 years after that, you probably had, let's say 10 of the top schools out there, 8 of them are running the system or some form of it.
Absolutely. The entire Clovis Central Valley area is just everybody playing against each other, doing the same thing. And
yeah,
some people have more talent, but that's neither here nor there. Let's dive into this. So when you took over at Wilcox after 9 or 10 years at Clovis East, time before that at Hoover, you'd had some grounding, you'd had some reps as the assistant. What'd you realize right away you needed to figure out that you were just like, whoa, wasn't ready for that one?
Oh man. Okay, here's a story. This is a true story. So we're playing at Roosevelt on the road, and we got a kid on our team, very talented athlete. He's about 5'11", maybe 6 foot. He's a stocky, stout athlete, but he could jump out of the gym. His fast twitch reactions and movements were just off the charts. And he was a D1 athlete. He was going. I think he had Fresno State was really hard going after him. We're at Roosevelt High School, and I think they're not very good, but they're very athletic and talented. The game is closer than it should have been. We should have been up by 20 plus points at halftime. And in the first half, where Tim pulled them because he wasn't doing something right in our defensive pressure. And he came to the bench, kicks 2 or 3 chairs over, and just is pouting. It's really it wasn't a good thing. And so he benches him, doesn't play him anymore. After the game, we're in the locker room, and I remember his father and I think 2 or 3 other guys come into the locker room. It was like there was going to be a rumble, and Tim's 6'3", and one of his closest buddies 6'8". They all play together, and then father's 6'4", and the other guys were bigger than him. And I'm 5'8", and I'm in the locker room. This is my first experience in Fresno, and I thought it was going to go down. Oh my goodness! But I learned really a lot how Tim handled that, and it was non-confrontational the way he handled it, and so that was a big time learning experience for me, learning how to deal with that. So that was one thing that I really remember. The other thing I remember, if you don't mind, is I don't know if this answers your question, but being a father coach, and then now facing a lot of fathers whose sons play club, and the fathers are taking them to all the tournaments, coaching them from the sideline. The father's doing it because he loves his son, and he most of the times it's for the right reasons. And so now I'm sensitive to that. I understand that when my sons were in high school, I had to take a step back, even though I was on the coaching staff, because there's pushback. There's a few instances where father-son relationships in that situation works out. I think Pete Maravich and his dad were like that, right? But it's very rare. Dad doesn't know anything, even though I was on the staff. So I was really lucky to be on a coaching staff that was really good, and I trusted them. So I took a step back, let them coach my sons. I'm on the court with them. We're both, Coach Gregory and I, on the court with them. But still, whenever something had to be said to my son, I wasn't the one to do it. I allowed the other coaches to do that. And it was when they would ask me questions later at home about things that the other coaches that had talked to them about or instructed them and whatnot, and I would answer, that they would get validation. And to me, that was important. So that was another thing that I also lean on as a head coach. When I meet fathers, when I meet moms, I'm sensitive. I keep that in mind and always try not to say something that might. I don't want to isolate them, but I also want them to know, hey, I was a father coach too. I was a father too. So, it helps. It helps out a lot.
So when you say you learned a lot about how Tim navigated that situation, what did you learn specifically that you've been able to apply? And what strategies do you have for others when you get into situations where the temperature is raised?
Yeah, it's always, whether I'm right or I'm wrong, just avoid those confrontations altogether. Because what I feel in coaching, it's a small circle. You're going to come and you're gonna meet that coach again sometime down the road, if not immediate, right? Later in the league. Always be professional. Just always be professional. Don't always be in a confrontational state of mind against that coach. It's not you against that coach. It's not. It's just you coaching your kids and letting them go out and learn and experience a journey of success and failures, learning how to compete. I see a lot of, I meet coaches that for some reason, I feel like I can judge people. I just have this thing, an instinctual thing. I can tell if a coach is a little selfish. I can tell when a coach really cares and by the things that they say. So the ones that say the right things, they care, give me that perception, then I know that it's going to be a good thing. But if I'm dealing with somebody that has selfish tendencies and the things that they say, then I know where their limitation is. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm just curious in regards to what is applicable as a tool, right? As we all navigate this, and what you were able to glean from Tim, your assistants are able to glean from you. We're able to put out there in the universe as to how are we sharing information that's going to be able to be accessible and then have utility for people that are using it. So on that note, you talk about how the culture of the Valley schools are, and you brought some of that to Wilcox. You brought hopefully some of that to Santa Clara where you're at. Yet I went to Fresno State the other day and I watched them practice, and they're this, and Vance applying his philosophy to certain things, the way in which it's morphed through all the iterations, right? What does that look like for you now? But big picture, if I asked you what's the best thing you do in your program that has the largest ripple effect on your culture, what would you say that is?
I would say it's teaching these kids how to compete. A lot of kids go out there and they're playing because it's fun. A lot of kids go out there and they're playing because their friends are playing. A lot of kids go out there because they like to play basketball. Okay. One of the things that I promise parents when I first meet them, I did it at Wilcox and I did it here at Santa Clara, is that, and I this is something I also learned from Tim, okay, is that teaching these kids when they leave my program, those kids will leave knowing and understanding the value of competing, being a competitor, especially here in Silicon Valley, everywhere else too, but especially here in Silicon Valley. Moms and dads have had to compete for their jobs. Kids in high school are competing for entry into colleges. Businesses compete. Professional sports teams compete. How do you compete? Not only as an individual, but how do you compete as a collective? That's what I take away. That's what I've done. I promise the parents that they will understand the value of competing.
Great. What does that look like? How do you do that? That's to take some of our jargon, let's say, as educators, and put it into practice. What does that look like? I will teach your kid to compete. Great. How are you going to do that?
Okay. In basketball, within the framework of the basketball, our practices are designed to take kids out of their comfort zone. Okay, number one. And you got to have staff. You got to have staff there to help you, because if it's only you, the head coach, then you're only going to achieve so much. So you got to have staff also arranged in a place where they're also motivating. They're also enthusiastic, but they have to be like that, have those character traits only if they understand the framework of what we're trying to do. If they're out there just blurting things out that aren't conducive to what we're doing in that specific drill, it's not really helpful. But when they pull a kid out and they're talking to them, they have to understand the framework of what we're doing so that they can teach these kids to do something right, so that when they go back in, they're competing against the other team. Secondly is when we have practice, we always have a winner and a loser. So every drill we do is competitive. So we teach them how to compete. For example, here's an example of what we do. Let's say we're running 2-on-1 cardinal. It's a layup drill, one defender in the back, outlet guys and whatnot. Okay, so we'll go like a series of 3, maybe 5, depending on how much time we got. The winners always validate the win with a free throw. Okay, losers automatically run. You suicide, up and back, whatever. If you don't validate that free throw, then you have to run it too. Okay, you make the free throw, you validate the win with the free throw, you don't run. They're competing because they don't want to run that sprint afterwards. It sounds very simple. It doesn't sound like it's something that's going to be really impactful, but it is, because that's just one drill. Every drill we do is competitive. And so these kids are, and the beauty of the way we play is that we're not just developing the top 5 or 7 guys. That's the old conventional OG way of playing basketball, right? You got 5 or 7 guys that play most of the game, and the only time the other 4 or 5 guys get in the game is if you're losing by a lot or winning by a lot, right? That's not the way it is. We're developing all of the guys on our team. When I select that roster, I want to look at that kid and say, does he compete on defense? Can I put him in the game as part of the rotation and not lose anything, maybe gain something? You know what I'm saying? As far as defensive tenacity, as far as being able to chase on a bad beat, you get a punch out, blocking out, not turn the ball over. So that's basically what it is. That's what I would say how we do it, how we teach these kids how to compete. And it's year in, year out, not just during the season. When that season's done, now I'm learning something here in this Bay Area is I think I want to partner up with a club affiliate and just steer my kids into this specific club so that they can play together instead of going off when the season's over to their little AAUs or whatever, some all over the place, they're doing it together, because that's an important component of building a program, is the off-season development. Because you got the young kids coming up, you have to from 8th grade into 9th grade, incoming freshmen. You got to teach them what we're doing, and you got to integrate them, and you got to build chemistry. Same thing with the varsity. You got younger underclassmen going up, you got seniors going out. So you got to get team chemistry. If you can do that over the summer, you'll accomplish a lot. Your program will get better, and collectively you can compete at a higher level. Pressure changes everything. I found that in high school. Pressure changes everything. So you got to teach them how we teach them how to do that. A lot of these kids come out of programs where they play zone defense. And it takes away from that competing spirit. I'm just going to guard this area. No, you're going to go guard the man, and you're going to guard him in a way that's going to be in line with what we're doing. So, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. So then, how do you navigate at a school that probably is sharing athletes and needs to? How do you navigate that aspect if you're trying to steer them into being year-round athletes?
What do you mean sharing athletes?
Meaning at a school like mine, where essentially our entire varsity basketball team on the boys' side plays football, and then they'll go out in the spring and play baseball, lacrosse, or track. So there is no like year-round, like it's seasonal, like old school, like when we grew up.
No, yes, and Santa Clara High School is like that too. I have football players, I have baseball players.
Correct.
Both ends of the spectrum there. Yeah, again,
but let me set it this way, right? So when you are in the cauldron of West Texas, Clovis, California, and you have 3,000 students at each of the school, and basically there's a handful of multi-sport kids, but most people are year-round athletes, right? That doesn't necessarily apply everywhere. And in your case at Santa Clara, you're sharing. So how do you implement that philosophy without necessarily having year-round access?
Okay, first I look at the individual as an athlete, a three-sport athlete. That tells you something about that athlete. If he can play 3 sports and compete and really do a good job, he's a special athlete. There's something up here that it's going to make it easier to coach and integrate into what you're doing. As far as football, I got football players now at Santa Clara where they're going to help us. They're going to be contributors too, but they have to earn it still. They have to also earn that. They come out to tryouts. They got to show me. They got to earn it. Nothing is given. It's all earned. I never encourage any sport athlete to just focus on basketball. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. Because football brings athletes with characteristics of toughness, and I like that. That's perfect for what we do. Baseball, I have baseball players right now that are pretty good, and they only show up my open gyms very rarely because they're doing a lot of baseball stuff. That's fine. But when they come to try out, as long as they're committed, they go hard, and they earn a roster spot, that's fine, because I'm the one making the judgment on these kids, whether they're going to be a part of this or not. And one of the things that I teach them is to be successful, you have to be willing to tell yourself, I want to be part of something that's bigger than me. Okay. And if they have a good experience in my program, it's going to help them when they go into baseball. It's going to help them when they go back into football, because they know that what's in the wintertime, there's something there that they can't wait to get to. Right? Winning fixes a lot of things.
Yeah, you got to get to that at some point. So let me ask this then. As a Vance disciple, as you described yourself in the email, there's very much a specific way of doing things that it's not a ton of outward facing variables amongst all the different pods where it exists. But I'm curious what you've noticed in the application of that approach that is different at each iteration, right? How Tony does it, how Tim does it, how Vance's successor at Clovis will do it, how the rest of the coaching tree does it, right? What are some tweaks that you've seen that have provided more success in your journey? And then I'm actually more curious about what you've learned from other coaches who aren't part of that tree, who don't see the world in that shade of color, whatever it happens to be, because it is a very specific way of doing things.
Yeah, for sure. For the first part of your question, what have I seen as far as tweaking? That system that Vance introduced, which he called ASA, attack, skip, attack, took on the phrase dribble, drive, motion, which was coined by John Calipari. And then it morphed out into what's called 4 out. And today I went to, yesterday I went and watched the San Jose City College women's team. Bob Burton, the legendary Bob Burton's over there. And he's implemented the dribble, drive, motion, ASA into his, and they won a league last year doing it. And they call it spots. They call it spots. That's something I learned yesterday, spots. Whatever you call it, the principles are always going to be the same. There's three principles that are always going to be the same. Number one is attack mentality. Number two is spacing. You got to maintain spacing so that you can create double and triple gaps. And number three is cutting hard. Because when you cut hard, it's like an assist. You're opening up a gap, creating a double or triple gap for your teammate who you just passed to. That's going to be able to try to get to that, have more success getting to that paint. But it's also, that's the basics. But from the basic, it's more. Vance has morphed it. When Vance went to Memphis and then he went over to the NBA, the principle of spacing and gaps, attacking the right gaps is still there. But what they do a lot in the NBA is they do a lot of ball picks. And that we always taught our kids, stay away from the ball handler, cut and get out of the way so that he can attack the gaps, right? But the NBA, it's a different game. So I've seen that, and even Vance does that too. When I was watching them at practice last week, they're doing ball picks. They got 7-foot guys that are like going to setting picks and popping out or going in, and they're not layups. Those guys are dunking it hard, and it's just incredible to watch. But so those are some of the tweaks that I'm seeing with the ASA and dribble, drive, motion offense is integrating ball picks. There's a podcast that's on YouTube a lot. I forget the name of the coach, and they do a really good job of breaking down how to transition into the basics of dribble drive and things like that. And so they're actually able to run sets off of it. They're pretty effective. I'm probably going to adapt, and because coaches are great takeaways. They're great takeawayers, I should say. And there's a lot of stuff that's happening that these coaches are coming up with, and a lot more new drills too. So my word to any coaches out there, if you're interested in looking at this type of system, is there's a lot of resources out there. I was really blessed to be at the right place, right time out in the Central Valley. I didn't know it. I just didn't know, but it just happened. And I was able to see Vance, the way he ran practices in high school. I was able to see how he ran practices at the JC level at Fresno City, went to Pepperdine, and then it didn't seem to work right at Pepperdine, and there's reason for that. But then I saw him when he went to the NBA, and then now it's Fresno State. Just there's so much to see. I was lucky. The second part of your question was about the other coaches, right? Coaches that aren't doing something like this. This isn't the only way to do things. This is just one of many. There's a lot of. I was watching another JC practice, San Jose men's team practice. Their offense is a half-court game, and they would have two big guys on the block, a third guy on the either side of the corner wing, and then the two guards up front in the 1 and 5 spots. And all they would do, there was no movement. They would just back it in, literally muscle bully, back it in, and then they would try to look for the post ups in small distances. But they had big guys. Okay, so I've seen flex. Flex is really effective too. Coach out at Cupertino, Craig Elgood, does a fantastic job coaching flex. I would say of all the high school coaches I've coached against, his flex offense is the hardest to guard. I mean, you really have to have your kids direct line pass deny. And we try to pin the ball on one side so that they can't execute their offense. But he does such a wonderful job of coaching that the kids are so disciplined in it. The flex is big time. Princeton offense, they're all good. But again, if whatever the coach adopts, if he believes in it and he's enthusiastic about it, and his coaching staff is just like him, and you're coaching it with that energy and enthusiasm, the kids will see it and the kids will execute it with that same level of enthusiasm. Of course, we want them to play our heart, not theirs.
Yeah. So on that note, there's a million different versions of basketball that are effective depending on what the coach believes in, what the talent pool allows for. What about non-basketball influence? What have you learned being away from the game that you've been able to apply to your approach to basketball?
Being away from the game, huh?
And by that meaning, you had your children come through basketball. I'm assuming at some point they tried something else and you went and observed that, or went and watched the volleyball team practice, or whatever it happens to be. I don't think we spend enough time looking at cross-training type applications of sport. And I'm always
Yeah,
curious
I
what
get it.
coaches have learned and applied or tried because they saw it somewhere else that maybe didn't traditionally fit.
Yeah, okay. So I think I'm understanding what you're asking here. So I have learned now that there are a lot of ways to condition for basketball, and it's not just a conventional way. You brought up cross training, and there's plyometrics and things like that. And a lot of the good programs are starting to hire these fitness trainers, nutritionists, things like that. And so that really goes a long way for these kids, whatever system they're playing in, to be able to go out there and be stronger, be healthier, avoid injuries and things like that. But one of the things that I've also learned is you mentioned year-round kids, right? Sometimes that's not good year-round. Okay, some kids aren't designed for that. My kids, basketball was a heavy influence on my family. My kids were growing up. I have three boys, and I remember taking my oldest son to his first AAU game here in the Bay Area. It was NJB. I didn't know anything about club or anything like that. I just was trying to find a league for my son to go play. I think he was in fourth grade or something like that. No, he might have been 6 years old, something like that. It's been so long. Anyways, he didn't want to go. He cried, didn't want to go. But when he got there, he just took off. He enjoyed it, and that's when his journey started. But sometimes if kids are playing year round, it's not good for them. They get burnout. I've seen it. I've seen it. And so that's another thing that if you're coaching and you have a successful program, I think those coaches that are part of those successful programs understand that. And they give that time off to those kids to go do something they want to do. Now, in the old days when we were young, those things that we would go do would be riding bikes, going swimming, going camping, fishing, things like that, right? Nowadays, the kids don't do that. They're at home or in the room on their cell phone, on the internet, social media, and all that stuff. It's give and take. And I think that's where the relationship building is important for the coach with the kids, is find out what are their interests outside of basketball. And then, just kind of get a feel for it. And okay, so we're going to be off for about a week and a half here, and take some time off, get some rest, but keep in mind what we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks. If you want to prepare for that or not, or if you want to go if you want to go camping, go camp. I remember coming back from events like that. Which was very rare for me, but it made me hungry. It made me real hungry, and I would come back and play and really go after it. I don't know if this was going to answer yours. Here's another good story. Fathers and moms or parents, whatever, need to be careful about directing their kids to do something in sports to fulfill their own expectation. Okay, this is what I learned. This is from Tim Emerson, his daughter. His daughter was playing at Hoover, and she was a prolific shooter. She's about 6'1", a really good shooter. Wasn't slow. She can get up and down the court. She was averaging about 25 points a game, something like that, but maybe about 11 rebounds a game. And she was Fresno State was recruiting her. And I remember Tim told me this. This is what Tim told me. He was driving home from a high school game, and he was barking at her in the car. If you'd have done this and this, you would have got 5 more rebounds. You would probably had about 10 more points if you made your free throws. And it's just going on and on. He did it so much that she told him she wanted to quit playing basketball. And it scared him. And he felt obligated to let me know, because I had kids too. It was a lesson that he learned. She eventually went on to play at Fresno State. But that's something that you got to be careful about, right? Year-round stuff. It's not just during the season, but like even in club, man, sometimes parents can be very, rabid. I hate to use that word, but kids aren't quite meeting their expectation, and they're freaking out on the sideline. They're really going after it, and it's a scary thing. You gotta be careful. You'll teach your kids not to want to play sport. So
no doubt, I think that line is a very fine line that you got to be aware of, especially those of us that are in coaching in regards to how much our children want or don't want feedback. And so ultimately, my son's a freshman now. He plays football. As the AD, I'm usually on the sideline. The quarterback coach wanted to talk to him on the headset. So I called him. I'm like, hey, coach wants to talk to you. And he basically goes on to tell the coach, hey, I don't want my dad saying anything to me. And it was like, all I said was, coach wants to talk to you. But it was like, even that was like, look, I'm not having this right now. I'm trying to play a game. And it was like, Cool. Imagine if I had
Wow.
said something else, right? That was innocuous, right? What if I was in the car? What if it was like, hey, all these extra things? How is that impacting their journey, right? And I think we often forget that our time has passed. We had our turn, right? Get out of
Yeah.
the way and let these guys have theirs. All right, let me
Yeah.
wrap with this. What have you most recently changed your mind on? Meaning you used to be dug in over here, and now you're over here, and it's intentional. It's a growth mindset piece in this age of political unrest and polarization, let's say. Often we tend to, as human beings, double down and dig in even further versus taking a step back and going, actually, let me look at it from this other perspective. So I'm always curious as a coach, right? We're always asking our kids to try new things and to be uncomfortable. What have you recently purposefully made a shift away from? And it doesn't have to be basketball related.
Do you mind if I talk about what I've shifted to? Because there have been some changes that I've implemented. When I started coaching at Clovis East in Hoover, I was in a more do as I do type coach. I was on the court live with the kids, and within myself, it was more of a selfish thing because I wanted to play. But as time went on, I began to be a better coach on the court, doing the things that they were doing. But I never really noticed Tim never was on the court. He never was on the court, and he could still play, but he was never on the court. And so when I took this job at Wilcox, by then I had already had a right hip replacement. My left ankle was bone to bone. I was already starting to suffer from these ailments from all these years of playing. And I
Father
couldn't.
Time is undefeated, coach. Undefeated.
I succumbed to it. I accepted it. But taking on a new coaching opportunity at Wilcox, I was really confident in the system that I could bring. But I was thinking about, man, I can't go on the court and do these things and show them. So that I began to understand that I didn't have to. I really didn't have to. And I could surround myself with coaches that could go on the court. I would show them how to do it, and they would do it. And that's how I was able to overcome that concern. Another thing that I did, and we started having a lot of success at Wilcox, was I started doing a lot of video review. I wasn't a big believer of video review. At Clovis East, we didn't really do a lot of video review of who we were getting ready to play. We were going to play one way. We already knew what we were going to play. It didn't matter who they had. And so I carried that same attitude that I don't need to look at video. But then when I looking at teams in the postseason that we were getting ready to play, that's when it hit me. Okay, I think I need to do this more often. And I know you laugh. A lot of coaches I tell this to, they laugh because they're like, you don't watch video.
I'm with you. I'm like how you were at Clovis East. We're gonna do what we're gonna do. And
Yeah,
watch it,
exactly.
get some tendencies, but we only have 90 minutes a day. I try to keep things tight for the kids because of the load they carry. And so I hear you. And that's where time is our only non-renewable resource. So how
Yeah.
are you using it to best prepare your student athletes and yourself? And if that's film, great. If it's reps, the Vance model, then it's reps, right? Whatever it happens to be, you got to figure out what works for you.
Yeah. That definitely brings value to your coaching experience, and it does make an impact on the kids. I will say that when you first introduce it to the kids, they're all caught up in look at me. But as time goes on and you start having success, they begin to understand the value of it, and so then things get more serious, and there's a lot of takeaway for them to go out and execute what you want them to do better.
For sure. And I'd be curious to talk after the season and ask this question again in regards to what have you changed your mind on once you are now going to a new school and seeing how things can be applied there, right? Or what resistance you face and how you have to pivot and shift. So we'll definitely have to circle back postseason and see what your takeaways were. But I appreciate you coming on and taking the time this morning. It's been fun.
Been my pleasure. Thanks a lot. Good talking to you.
All right. Oh, wait, where's my pause button? There it is.